Well, let's talk about the other team down there in Florida before we move over to Notre Dame and Navy today. We've got Florida State and Clemson. Obviously, Clemson favored 17.5 on the spread on this. It doesn't take much to see what we've seen without Jimbo Fisher down there in Florida in Seminole land, that they are, well, we'll call it a rebuilding year, Rick. But certainly you got the Clemson Tigers. I don't think very many people are picking Florida State to win this, especially with the spread being 17.5.
No, and that whole program is just under rebuild. I mean, from a culture standpoint to their play style. I mean, every aspect of it's in a rebuild. So you can't take anything from Florida State this year, or that was how am I trying to word this? What Willie Taggart's trying to do. It's not really an indictment on how Florida State is going and what type of coach Willie Taggart is when he's trying to change an entire culture right now. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt this year, give him a pass on this season because, Jimbo just kind of left Florida State high and dry for Texas A&M. And Willie Taggart's even they kind of did the same thing at Oregon, but Taggart's he's got a long road ahead of him at Florida State, and I know that fan base is going to be really short with him. They're already calling for him to be fired, or you know how it goes in college football. So, but it's going to be a big blowout today. I didn't think Clemson would take care of NC State last week in the way they did. I thought that might be a halfway decent game. So if it's anything like last week's game for Clemson, it's going to be what you say the spread was 17. Just go ahead, just double that.
17.
And that's
Are
what
you talking about? Florida State 17. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten.
Just double that, and that's probably what Clemson win by today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten. Obviously, one of the biggest elephants in the room, Ohio State, getting beat by Purdue last week. They take on Michigan this week. That's going to be, I've said all year long, I still think Jim Harbaugh is overpaid, overrated. But one of the things we got to look at, the Michigan Wolverines are winning games at a time when they need to win games. And let's face it, Ohio State, as I mentioned to you last night in the text, is looking a lot like Urban Meyer's team anyways, looking a lot like Urban Meyer's team did before he left Florida. I think Urban Meyer's days are numbered, and certainly if Michigan wins today and Ohio State loses, it's going to boot them right out of any talk about the playoffs, and I think we've seen the end of the Urban Meyer era in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, I think any type of talk about the playoffs should be over with Ohio State right now. I know they're sitting in the 11th spot. They have one loss. I think that's the only team outside the top 10 right now that actually has a shot at the playoffs. But that's a big long shot. They're going to beat Michigan at the end of the year, obviously win out. They're going to win the Big Ten championship, and then they're going to need help from the teams above them to lose some games and get knocked down below what Ohio State's ranked now. So they're going to win out. They're going to need a lot of help. I just don't think, losing Nick Bosa this year the way they did, he got hurt. Now he's completely left school. That's your best defender, and already that takes you out any title hopes. He was their best defender. That defense has just fallen apart since his departure. So they still could have been a playoff team without him, but a title contender, I don't think so at all. But then look at the running game also. Their running game has just way underperformed this year. J.K. Dobbins is, I would still say, he's probably one of the most talented running backs in the country, and they just cannot block for him. They cannot run the football. And they're putting too much on their quarterback, Dwayne Haskins. Haskins had 74 pass attempts last week against Purdue. To put that into perspective, Tua Tagovailoa with Alabama has had 73 pass attempts for the entire season. So you combine all that, that's not a playoff contender anymore. Even if they win out, they're still going to need help. So them losing that game hurts the Big Ten really bad.
Well, and let's talk a little bit more about the Big Ten. Obviously we want to go homer here in just a minute with IU and Minnesota. I certainly know playoff contentions in that game, but I want to talk about that. But one team that I obviously at the beginning of the season, I thought Penn State would be that number 4 team. That's not going to happen, but I have seen Iowa play some very good football. I've seen some Penn State play some very good football. While I respect Iowa's been able to what they've been able to accomplish, I still think Penn State's the better team. Obviously, neither one of these guys we're going to be talking about in the playoffs, and I know we're going to get back into Breaking Rank coming on Wednesday. Well, really, after Halloween, after Tuesday, I guess, it doesn't really matter except for maybe 10 teams, and which is where we're going to turn our focus to. Not that the other teams doesn't matter, but certainly I think one of the teams that we'll be talking about, even though they're number 18, they're number 17 now, Penn State, but Penn State and number 18, Iowa, I think the ones that we should pay the most attention to still in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State is Penn State. Today we've got Ohio State, Penn State. The spread is at 6.5 at 3:30 tonight on ESPN this afternoon.
When I look at the Big Ten right now, I see a handful of good teams, but not one great team. And with that scenario, they basically just cannibalize each other, and they completely just eliminate themselves. The conference just eliminates itself from any type of playoff talk. So, yeah, that's what the Big Ten is right now. It's a good conference, but it's not a championship-winning conference by any means this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about IU, Minnesota. Let's go Homer. Obviously, IU needs a win just for their helps on getting to a bowl game, which I think they still have an outside shot of doing that, but they've not done themselves any favor here recently. The good thing about it is that the Minnesota Gophers are definitely a foe that I think they can handle. That's going to help them check one more box to get to a bowl game.
Well, that timeout game was last night. They lost that game.
See, that's what happens when you stay up all freaking night watching the freaking Dodgers. All right.
I don't know the final score, but I know in the fourth quarter they were down. Minnesota's up by a couple touchdowns, but I don't know the final.
I played today. See, Rick, that's why I count on you, man. You are my yin, and you are my yin to my yang. That's for sure.
Well, when you text me to talk IU Minnesota, I'm assuming you already knew the game was on and you watched it, or something like that.
Dude, I tell you what, 18 innings of the Dodgers. We're going to get into that with Mo from the BS Sports Show here later on. Certainly, the probability of the Dodgers pulling out a World Series win is still very, very slim. But they proved last night they're willing to fight for it at home, and it was a long night. Most woke up this morning and said, "Are they still
46 different players playing that game."
18 pitchers and 46 different players, you said?
Yes, sir.
I had not seen that stat. That is incredible. You are now promoted to official statistician of the Balance.
I've brought two stats. That two and Dwayne Haskins stat, now this one. I'm full of stats today.
Full of something today, that's for sure. Well, let's get into it. I was hoping that Matt from up in Notre Dame Radio Network would be joining us. He's probably got a lot going on, but it's a big game today between Notre Dame and Navy. A lot of history between the two teams, but let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the breakdown, because I tell you what, I think Notre Dame is looking to run the table, and certainly they have to each win is very important for them, especially consideration at all into being in the playoffs. So let's break down the X's and O's, the game of the week for the Balance this week. I almost said Army Navy. I'm ready for that, Rick. Notre Dame Irish against the Navy Midshipmen.
Well, I think this is the 90th meeting or something like that. 90 years these two teams have been playing each other, so it's a long time. That's a pretty good rivalry. So you say if you weren't sure that's a rivalry game or not, it definitely is. Of course, Notre Dame won a 43-game winning streak or something like that before Navy finally got their win. But Navy's kind of had their number the last few years.
Well, Navy's a very good team. Well, almost all of your service teams are very, very disciplined at the line. It's very, very hard. They don't get a lot of penalties called against them, and they just play good old school-fashioned football without any of the trickery going on or anything like that. You got to like all this. We do. We support all of the service academies, but Navy certainly is one of those tough teams. And certainly you guys, when I say you guys, I speak of Notre Dame because you're such a homer with Notre Dame. So I'm going to go ahead and throw you in there with you guys. What's a use? But you guys have got to not fall asleep against Navy, even if they only win by a field goal, Rick. a loss is going to be dramatically more important to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish than it is to the Navy midshipmen.
Yeah, well, it depends on what expert you listen to. A loss eliminates Notre Dame from any type of playoff talk, or the other half of the experts saying one loss will still might get them in because since they have a tiebreaker, they won the head-to-head against Michigan, they'll still get in over Michigan. So, but who knows what the committee will do. I tend to side with if they lose, they're probably not making the playoffs. So that's the way it's gone the last couple years they've been in this playoff talks. They lose, they fall so far back out of the playoffs that there's not much time to make that up. But they do have a tiebreaker. They do have a head-to-head win against one of these teams in contention. So I don't know how that's going to play out. There's still 5 games left for the Irish to do. All they can control is just winning football games and let everything else just sort itself out.
Well, we don't have a lot of time left on the clock. I believe Steve Wilson of Speedway Digest is going to be joining us talking about NASCAR rolling into Martinsville. We're in the championship ride down there. I know he's in the mountains, so we'll just kind of keep talking football until he calls in. But let's try to get the games in that we want to get. Another really big game that we've talked about as far as getting love from the playoff committee, and that's number 14 Washington State. They take on number 24 Stanford. Today, 3.5 points. I had to double check that because now you got me doubting myself, Rick. I blame it on the Dodger hangover, or maybe a real hangover. No, I don't have a hangover. I'm just kidding. Washington State at number 24. Go ahead.
No, I was going to jump in. I thought you might have been done, but yeah, I'll just go ahead and jump in here. I think Washington State wins this game pretty easy. I could see Stanford and how their physical play can slow down Washington State, make this ball game maybe even still a victory here. But Stanford isn't the team everybody thought they were at the beginning of the season.
They are who they thought we were.
Yeah, definitely Washington State ain't the football team we thought they were at the beginning of the season because now they look like world beaters all of a sudden. So I think Washington State can wins this game pretty easily. But I would like to see Stanford actually get this big win, and here's the reason why, because I'm such a Notre Dame homer. Stanford still has a shot to win the Pac-12 title, and in the ACC, Virginia Tech has a very, very small chance of winning the ACC title somehow still with 2 or 3 losses now they have. If that happens, then Notre Dame would be the only team in the country to beat 3 conference champions. They would have beaten Michigan if they win the Big Ten, Stanford they win the Pac-12, and Virginia Tech they win the ACC. That's why I want Stanford to win tonight.
Well, we'll see what happens. Let's talk a little bit about the highlights, if you will, of what out here. They just did let's call it a shellacking. No, let's just call it a straight out ass kicking against Baylor Bears. Not that Baylor's that good, but for West Virginia is that good, and they're a number 13 team. I don't know if it's going to move the needle that much, but when you look at a team that beats Baylor 58-14 midweek, when we don't have anything else to talk about, that's big news.
Well, Baylor just hasn't been the program ever since Art Briles and the whole sexual assault and everything that he was covering up at Baylor and at Title IX and everything Baylor's gone through regarding that. Baylor's football program just hasn't been nowhere near the same. And all this win means for West Virginia the other night is the fact that they still got beat by Iowa State. So they're pretty much out of the playoffs. They can beat Oklahoma this year, but they don't have any shot. The only shot for the Big 12 is Texas and Oklahoma.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Texas. They're number 6. The spread's at 3.5 at Oklahoma State. Is Sam Ehlinger really ready to go? Texas says he will start, but how effective will he be? We will find out, but this is going to be a good matchup between the Longhorns and the Sooners. I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Cowboys, Oklahoma State. Yeah,
Cowboys.
No, I got you. You're good.
I get the two. I have the Oklahoma dyslexic moments going on between the Cowboys and the Sooners, but I knew who I meant.
That's a good point. With Shane Buechele and Sam Ehlinger, the quarterbacks of Texas, and you don't know who's going to start because Ehlinger's a little beat up, and Shane Buechele is actually very capable of leading the offense, but it's not really a controversy going on. It's just been who's getting who's been getting the reps this week and in preparation for Oklahoma State, the offense could be a little sluggish. And